Welcome back. I hope you're enjoying Immersed Europe. We have something a little different this time around. I'm going to share with you just a little history, which, I think it's important to share a little bit of the history as to how we got to this point. So, I know I'm known for running the Immersive Technology Alliance. I serve as executive director, but the way things really started out is through a website called Meant to Be Seen, or mtbs3d.com. And what happened was, in this community, which was founded in 2007, there was a very big, we'll call it a virtual reality movement, got started. Now, what happened was one of our moderators was Palmer Luckey, and it's through the MTBS forums that he met John Carmack, and of course they had a very illustrious relationship, and we know how everything went. What happened was, once Oculus got started, there were several members within the MTBS community that were hired by Oculus, because MTBS was, of course, this wonderful place to find top virtual reality expertise. Now, one of our members is currently a moderator. His name's Andre Hernandez, and as a personal hobby, he developed software called Vireio Perception. And the idea behind Vireio Perception is it would let you take an existing game and play it in virtual reality, even though it wasn't designed for that purpose. So this was a big deal. I mean, we've seen technologies like this for just stereoscopic 3D, but now we have this ability with virtual reality as well. So what happened was, when Andre, was hired by Oculus, as called a parting gift, he made MTBS, or Meant to Be Seen, the home of Vireio Perception. And Vireio Perception are free and open source virtual reality drivers, which means that they're free to use. Everyone is welcome to contribute to them, and it's a community a community activity. Now, to my immediate left is Simon Brown, and to his left is Grant Bagwell. And these are who we would call the core developers of Vireio Perception today. And there's also a third member named Dennis Reichel, who very much would have liked to be here today, but he couldn't be here today. But I'm really excited about this panel. I think the type of work that these gentlemen are doing is revolutionary, because it speaks to a community working together. It talks about bringing virtual reality to software that wouldn't have had virtual reality ability otherwise. And as we move forward, I think you'll see how inventive these gentlemen are, and it's something to be proud of. So please, let's give them a round of applause, and we'll get started. So let's start with something. I mean, I just by a show of hands, how many of you have heard of Vireio Perception? Okay, so actually quite a few of you. So let's first define, what we're ultimately aiming for, and then we'll see, how Vireio fits in where possible. So how would you describe, and Grant, I'll start with you, how would you describe the core features or criteria that makes a video game VR ready?
Okay, so there's...
Hold the mic closer, yeah.
Hello. So there's certain things, I mean, it's pretty well established through the sort of Oculus guidelines, but so you basically need head tracking within, you need two views in a stereo view, like that. So you want your movements translated into the world, you want the 3D to be correct from a geometry point of view rather than something else. And then really it's just about doing whatever else you can to make the player feel part of that game, part of the world that they can't necessarily get with a 2D view of it. So I guess that's the simplest terms, and everything else is just in the details.
So, I think we should show a sample of it. And while we're showing the sample, I don't think there's audio with it.
Probably not.
So why don't we show it, and Simon, maybe you could explain what we're seeing, okay? So I'm going to start the video clip on this computer. Okay, good.
Okay, so some of you probably recognise this game. This is probably the game that gets the most requests.
You could lower the lights, please.
Can we play this in virtual reality? This is Skyrim, if you don't know already. I would say the majority of people that use Vireio probably use it for Skyrim, and it's certainly one of the better experiences. It's not without its issues, obviously. You know, there are sort of cutscenes that will drag you away from from what you're experiencing, and some of the on-screen HUDs are not perfect and hard to see sometimes, but we've done what we can to try and address those issues in the driver. So another thing you might notice is there appears to be some latency when the head tracking moves, and that's actually our implementation of asynchronous time warp. Obviously not sort of the driver level. And here you can see the vanishing of Ethan Carter, which is actually one of the prettier games that we've added support for. I understand the developer is actually adding official support for this in the future. But for now, if you want to play it in VR, it's quite a compelling experience. It's relatively slow. There aren't any dramatic changes to the camera. There's very little sort of HUD effects, so it's quite good. This is obviously a very different experience entirely. Shooting zombies is quite a visceral experience, and obviously in VR, if you've tried the Starbury Studios experience, then you'll know what it's like. And again, it translates reasonably well to VR. Obviously, this is another game that has some issues, hard to see, heads-up display, that sort of thing. But there are a variety of approaches we've taken to try and address some of those, which we'll get onto in more detail. And the next one, any second now? Oh yeah, so this is Fallout New Vegas. So using the similar game engine to Skyrim, if I remember rightly. So this, again, it looks rather good using the Vireio driver. It's not, completely pain-free. This is another game that will do some rather funny things with the camera while you're halfway through sort of walking around. It'll suddenly drag the camera over and look at a character. Perhaps it will change the field of view unexpectedly. So, it's not the perfect VR experience, but the point is, people don't expect it to be with an injection driver. And this is the final one. So this is Borderlands, which is actually really good fun in VR. It translates very well because of the sort of cel-shaded graphics. It doesn't try to be photorealistic, which actually makes it quite a compelling experience. The head tracking is pretty cool. We'll get into that in a few moments, I'm sure.
Okay, very good. So it's cool, yeah? So how would you describe, obviously there's imperfections. These games were not designed to be in VR in the first place. This is a hack. You're getting the software to do something it wasn't designed to do. Maybe, Grant, you could explain fundamentally how the software works.
Yeah, so it's an injection driver, so it basically sits between the game itself and the graphics card and intercepts the DirectX calls. So basically we take like a middleman and we take what the actual engine is giving to us. We do some things to convert that obviously into stereoscopy, and then we output it normally to the graphics card. So at the basic level, it just injects itself into the process.
So, you're getting 3D. Obviously, that's the reason why you have that double view. If you know Oculus, and it supports other formats as well, I think. But obviously, you're getting that full stereoscopic 3D. But you have to go beyond that. It's not just about getting 3D. We've had 3D drivers since for years. What other features had to be added to the software to make that VR compliance? Like, for example, field of view.
Yeah. So. Definitely. So you can get it running 3D and it will just look like any 3D game if you have it on your 3D monitor. So yeah, the first thing, you want to get your field of view as large as possible, and there's obstacles to that. You know, sometimes the game engine won't expose that, so then it's a case of how do we get it to do that. The 3D in itself is actually worth talking about because it's what we would call maybe true 3D in terms of the engine, in that we effectively create a separate camera view that is actually separated properly from your IPD to get that working. I think once you get at that stage, you're like, okay, I can see this is working, this is going well, and then you start noticing everything else. Okay, I can't read any of the menus. Some things can be distracting. Maybe even the gun is like huge, and anyone who's played driving games will notice sometimes, oh, my hands look huge. Like, what's going on here? So it's then looking at those sort of items and saying, right, well, we know exactly where the HUDs are, so we can actually take those and we can rescale them, we can size them, we can make them viewable, and potentially in the future, you know, we could do more with that to actually separate them out of the game, perhaps on the side sort of panel. In terms of things like the hands, is just really trying to understand the engine underneath, saying what's possible to actually make that better. So certainly Borderlands, which you would have noticed from that small clip, there's lots of things going on. The hands look quite small and they look realistic in game, and it's because the Borderlands engine itself it uses, you have a player field of view as well as a world field of view, so you can actually increase that, and the perception of your hands goes away and you can scale things properly. So it's all things we have to do to get it to the level which you probably get naturally from, you know, like the latest Unreal Engine or something.
So there's two sides to this. I mean, one side is you've got the software development. Obviously, you're coding this, you're trying to get it to run, you're trying to keep it from crashing, because I imagine every game has its own little intricacies. But the other side is, customization for the game itself. Can you talk a little bit about because I want people to appreciate the work that you put into this. It's not an overnight thing. Maybe Simon, you could talk about the work that goes into making a game compatible with Vireio perception.
Yeah, so...
and by the way, one more thing. I want to highlight, these gentlemen, when they're working on this software, it's a volunteer basis. No one gets any resources out of this. It's all volunteer that they put into this. It's very important. Yeah, go ahead, please.
We do it for love.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you take a game that someone has said, oh, I'd love to see that in VR. And obviously there's some hurdles you have to get over in the first place. So, for example, some game engines work much better with Vireio than others. So Unreal Engine 3 is particularly good. We've had a lot of success with that. So the Source engine is pretty good. If you know the underlying engine, that does make things more straightforward. You can sort of tailor the driver using a variety of bits of configuration required, so that you can at least get it injecting in the first place. Once you manage to do that, you have to figure out these particular criteria, shader constants they're actually called, that allow you to take every single object in the game world and render it twice to get true geometric 3D. For some games that's easy to find out, that information. For others that's actually incredibly difficult, and that's one of the bigger challenges we have to deal with. So if you get that information one way or another, then you're onto a winner. So you've got your stereoscopic view. Out of the box, it uses mouse emulation. One of the things that makes Vireio unique among injection drivers is an additional utility called VR Boost, which was originally written by Dennis.
Dennis, right.
And we've sort of extended it in the meantime. But essentially what that does is takes the HMD orientation and injects values directly into the game engine, which then gives you low latency head tracking, far superior to anything you'd get with mouse simulation. So it also allows you to have true head tracking. So if you turn your head 90 degrees to the right, it will be exactly 90 degrees to the right in the game. But of course, identifying those memory addresses responsible for that sort of thing is a bit of experiment in itself. So you have to use additional tools.
So I just want to underscore, because to appreciate what was before and what came after. So if you didn't have these memory registers, if you didn't have the VR Boost, what would you have done otherwise? You mentioned mouse look. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, and then why this is so much so different?
Okay, so the way mouse emulation essentially works is it maps the head movements to a sort of virtual mouse, if you will. So if you turn your head to the left, then it will virtually move the mouse to the left, and in most games that will result in the view moving to your left. However, there's no direct correlation between the amount you move your head and the amount in game that your view is going to change. So you can kind of tweak it and try and get the ratios as good as you can get, and it will be reasonably compelling, but it never feels the same. Another aspect to it is if you look down and then you move the mouse up, then your view will actually move back up again, which is quite uncomfortable, to be looking at the floor but actually seeing straight ahead. So the advantage VR Boost gives us is that we can map the pitch orientation of the headset directly into the game's memory without it being affected by the mouse.
So you're kind of getting the actual game engine to do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, essentially.
And the other advantage of this is with mouse simulation, you're then kind of tied to the limitations of that mouse. So generally, from a VR standpoint, that's going to be quite high latency. It also means that if the game is basically mouse or gamepad reliant, you're then having to use a mouse. And as we know from VR, it's a lot more comfortable if you've got a gamepad with you. It's easier to move around.
Okay, excellent. And what about, just something to bring up, field of view. I mean, a lot of these games are designed to be on televisions or computer monitors, and yet the head-mount displays were getting anywhere from 90 to, in some cases, 120 degrees field of view. Have there been challenges getting games to match up with these new display sizes? Have you had to come up with some creative solutions?
Sure. I mean, I'll let Simon talk about projected matrices. Yeah. But at the basic level, if a game gives you the field of view, brilliant. We can just use that. If it doesn't, much like the orientation, when the game runs on the operating system, it's got a portion of memory which it uses, and somewhere within that memory it stores certain values. So it's going to store basically the camera's position and the camera's orientation. So if we can actually directly write to that, then we can effectively adjust the camera in very low latency. In a similar way, usually with a game, unless it's really bullish, then there is actually a place where it's storing the field of view. So even of games where they've decided actually we don't want to give the user this, if we can actually find that out by complicated techniques we don't have the time to talk about, but then we can actually automatically boost that game. And then also if the game tries to actually reduce it, you've got something there and they're saying no, stop that, and we're always going to show it at 120 or 110. But the other method, we've had a couple of games which just the engine is hard-coded for like 60. It was for a console to start with, so we've done something slightly different with that.
Yeah, so some games will just not accept a new field of view. So we took a slightly different approach for those, and we reproject the entire game scene because we're essentially a proxy between the game and the graphics card. We intercept every single call that sort of is made. So we can actually take the projection matrix and modify that to our own needs. So, for example, a game like Rainbow Six Vegas, I think that only goes up to 60 or something, which is no good for VR. But we can then take the projection matrix the game thinks it's supplying to the graphics card, and adjust it to up to anything like 100, 110 or whatever, and the game will then be rendered on the graphics card and presented to the HMD with the appropriate field of view. There are going to be issues with that because as far as the engine is concerned, it's rendering a 60-degree field of view, and objects outside of that's not going to waste time rendering. So you might get sort of culling issues where various items around the periphery start to vanish and things. But it does make games more accessible that would never have had even the hope of being played in a sort of VR scenario.
Now, I'm going to say something. Necessity is the mother of invention. Is there truth that, I know it's true, but I'm going to ask it as a question so you can answer it and how you solve the problem is, a few months ago, is it true that Vireio perception was, on the precipice of, disappearing? And, can you explain why and how you overcame the challenge?
Yeah, so when Oculus released the SDKs, or 0.6 I think it was obvious that extended mode was going to be history, essentially. The way Vireio worked up to that point was to do client-side rendering, so we were doing all the barrel distortion, chromatic aberration correction, everything like that in a pixel shader. And then basically outputting it to the extended display, which was the HMD. With that disappearing, we had to take a completely different approach. Now, one of the biggest problems we faced was the fact that Oculus dropped support for DirectX 9. Vireio is, at this point in time, only compatible with the X9 games. So we had to find some way of getting games that are written using DirectX 9 that is not supported in the Oculus SDK. So it became apparent that actually that was never actually going to work. However, what we could do was fake a DirectX 9 backend as far as the game is concerned, but actually use DirectX 9 EX, which was the sort of Windows Vista implementation of DX9. And that allowed a variety of additional techniques that we never had access to. So you could share textures between different DX versions, between different resources, etc. So we were actually then able to, as far as the game's concerned, it's still rendering away happily on DX9, but we can then take the game textures for the left and right eye and use them as textures on a virtual screen, which is sitting, as far as the user is concerned, right in front of his face.
So just so I know, for the critics of Windows Vista, is it true that if it wasn't for Windows Vista, Vireio perception would be no more?
Yeah, absolutely. They changed the driver display model underneath, and because of that allowed us to fake DX9 using DX9EX, split those textures onto a virtual screen, and it essentially works now in direct mode, which it wouldn't have done previously.
Okay, very good. So, Grant, I got a question for you. It's not going to be an easy question to answer. I'm just waiting to see how you come up with the answer for this. Can you describe asynchronous time warp?
All right. So,
you got your pads? Okay, you got to write this down. Okay.
I'm not going to try and go into the depth that certainly Oculus do, but I can kind of explain what we're doing.
Actually, maybe define the problem first and then the solution will.
Okay, so probably it's been discussed probably a lot of time. I know Richard Hurley from AMD. VR needs power, and it needs frame rates to be high. And I think the current elephant in the room is, well, what about the people that don't have the machine that's going to do that? Skyrim, I've got a GTX 980 at home on my main computer, and that's running Skyrim still outside at around 45 frames per second. What will happen is, the problem you'll get is as you turn your head with that, by the time you've turned your head, it wouldn't have updated enough, and you get a perceived judder as you're going around, and it makes you very sick straight away. It makes everyone sick, not just people who are not used to VR. So I'm not going to claim to know who first invented the idea of asynchronous time warp, but what we basically do is we've moved things over to DirectX 9 EX, but as part of that, that then gets fed into a separate DirectX 11 device. And what the device does is it says, right, do I actually have a frame ready to show the user from their current position? And what would normally happen if you had no time warp at all is it would just go, well, I'll give you the latest, which may be behind, maybe something else. So what we do is we say, if we actually don't have a frame ready, then we use the Oculus SDK to say, right, we're going to use their time warp method, which presents basically the last frame plus whatever your head has actually moved in between. And what you'll see during that video is the actual eyes feel like they're lagging. It feels like they're moving. But what's happening there is it's actually moving to do that. On the screen it looks terrible, it looks like that must be awful, but actually in the Rift itself, you get the idea that it's not moved at all. And usually, I mean, we've found that anything above kind of half the FPS you need, so currently on the DK2 37.5, anything above that from a frames per second then results in almost perfectly smooth experience in the game. Which, if anyone who's ever tried to walk around outside in Skyrim and get a good frame rate is an achievement.
Okay, and again, Windows Vista. Am I correct that if it wasn't for that discovery, this opportunity would have been closed off, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. So, I want to talk a little more actually, if we could separate from the software for a moment, there's an ethics consideration here called virtual reality ethics. Is it right to have Vireio perception in a world where, people are concerned about users having a wonderful virtual reality experience? How do we justify the existence of Vireio perception? Is it right to exist?
For me, I think there's quite a compelling case that it is, because we are at the infancy of virtual reality. We really are at the, what do we call it, pong stage. And, certainly when I first got involved in the project, it was from a very simple need, a very kind of selfish need that I would like to try certain experiences there. And if you look at what currently exists, you've got a whole breadth of content. So then you're saying, okay, if you're talking about kind of a purist VR point of view, they're going to say all things need to be designed from the ground up. But then because we are at such an early stage of it, before we can actually do that and say what that needs to be, we need to be testing things and prototyping them out before we can do anything. And I think something like Vireio Perception actually gives you that ability without having a team of 10 guys creating levels designed. So you can say, and what regular users normally say is, I experienced this just on my monitor, it would be great walking through it. And sometimes they're right, but quite often they're wrong, and actually it's terrible when you walk through. But so I think Vireio is that, and I think if you're saying, well, does it work or doesn't it, that's more of a technical conversation of kind of, and if we were to come out and say, well, we tried to do something and it's just horrific, we'd be the first to admit, well, actually, it doesn't work. But really it's more, we're just from two kind of disadvantages. One is we can't change the original content, so the game's going to work as the game did. And the second is that we don't necessarily have access to the lower level of the engine. But if we can do inventive things to get by at least the second one, then we're just in a position where we're evaluating the first one to say, okay, does this content work? And I mean, I think there's quite a few experiences. I mean, Andre from Oculus now tried Bioshock 2, and he said it was as close to kind of made for VR as I think you can get from an injection driver, which is to say the head tracking felt really low latency, like it was on there. And just because it's given him and everyone else the ability to try that game, try that environment, to say, right, what actually works here and what doesn't. So for me, maybe in 5 years, I don't think, maybe 3, I don't think VR injection will necessarily be around apart from the kind of nostalgia effect. But while we're at this stage, I think it's very worthwhile to actually go through and try these things out.
What are your thoughts, Simon?
I think Grant pretty much covered it really. We do get frequent requests for games, people saying, I found this game, I would love to experience it in VR. And, we just offer them the opportunity to do that in some cases. I mean, we have had games that just do not work at all. We've tried, we've done everything we can, and they're just a disaster. I mean, Xenoclash was one of those. I mean, so, we recommend that people then don't go away and try that because it's not pleasant. But, quite often we've had suggestions of games and, they've worked very well. And I think it's an enabler for that sort of experience. We don't profess it to be a perfect virtual reality experience because it clearly isn't going to be. It's essentially a hack. But
a good hack.
It's not a bad hack as hacks go. But, that's what it is. And like Grant says, in a few years' time, outside of people thinking, I'd just like to dip back into Skyrim and have a bit of a wander around, I'd be surprised if there was really a place for injection drivers, once there's AAA titles out there with true VR support and the SDKs and APIs are settled down and, everybody's contributing. But, in the meantime, I think it helps people to experience things they might want to see in VR that they otherwise wouldn't have the option to.
I'd be interested to know if we could separate from the software for a moment. You're getting the opportunity to try different games and experiences as you're developing with Vireio. And are there certain game experiences that work really well with Vireio perception? I'm not talking about compatibility. I'm talking about the nature of revisiting these games in a virtual reality form. Do some genres work better than others? And if so, which ones? That's an open-ended question. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, part of the fun is finding out. I mean, they're obviously kind of matched to kind of FPS games, but then FPS games now, what they are 10 years ago, there's like a whole breadth of experience you can get from that. Something like Dear Esther or The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, which I know some people call like a walking simulator, but something that's just really slow, allows you to take the time, works really well. That isn't to say, if you've got your VR legs, that kind of faster paced ones to do. I mean, there's definitely lessons to be learned for when you are starting out afresh with a new thing. I mean, one thing we find is we're trying to test something out, so there's a shader in the wrong place, we're trying to identify, push it back. All that time someone's shooting us at the same, and we're just having to restart just because, some games want to throw you straight into the action. And it's those sort of lessons you can still kind of learn from injection drivers in the same way you can from just prototyping from scratch.
Now, I know this doesn't have anything to do with Vireio perception, but it's in the spirit of Vireio, I think. Simon, is you've recently taken an interest in Samsung's Gear VR and reinvigorating a classic. Can you share the story?
Yeah, I fancied a little holiday project while I was away for a couple of weeks, and I decided I'd have a go at taking the original Quake and making that run in the Gear VR. I found an implementation of the Quake engine that supported the appropriate version of OpenGL, and essentially sort of wrapped it in the mobile SDK and have it up and running. So, and it went up onto the Sideload VR site fairly recently, so people have been downloading that and having death matches and all sorts, and hopefully not making themselves too sick.
And the response has been good?
Yeah, it's been, I'd say, almost entirely positive. I implemented a variety of different control methods because it's well known that your stick control can make you feel nauseous, so I implemented a sort of swivel chair mode so that you can't turn with the stick, you have to physically turn your body, which that you then get the one-to-one. There's a comfort mode which just helps people turn a bit quicker, and then of course there's traditional yaw control, which is known to make people ill, but unless you're a hardcore first-person shooter VR gamer, then you probably don't want to go down that road.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there's been kind of like a movement against first-person shooters in VR. I mean, unless I'm mistaken. If I'm mistaken, let me know. But it sounds to me like that a lot of the really popular experiences with Vireio perception, and now with Quake, which, let's face it, that's like a first-person fast shooter, is very popular. Do you think the baby's being thrown out with the bathwater?
For me, I think is just like VR. People will be put off by bad VR, and with injections, exactly the same. People will be put off by bad injection. But a project that we came in contact with a chap, and he was actually a large help, was Dan Church, who's doing the Fly Inside, which was basically the modification for Flight Simulator X. And that's injection VR as well. That is an injection driver. He doesn't have access, and he's not modding the engine underneath. But he's doing a lot of special things with it now. I mean, he's got a beater up which has leak motion in, so you can actually press the panels in the cockpit. And I've seen the reaction to that, and I've tried it myself. And if you were to imagine that experience wouldn't exist if you were to just take that purist attitude, I think it actually harms VR in general because you're getting it out there. And I definitely feel without it, we would have some experiences that a lot of the users are saying that was one of the best experiences I've had. In 2 years' time, that probably won't be true, or even by the time these headsets are launched. But in the meantime, it really stands up there.
Do you have
Yeah, I think the point we're at is still very much early adopter, and it's typically people that may have seen the first wave of VR come and go, and it's sort of stayed in their memory, and I think, oh, I wish that really worked out. And then they progressed onto games like Quake, for example, and they thought, that'd be fun. I'd love to really be there and experience it. So when VR's come back again, and they're given the opportunity to play these games, you know, they go for it. In the longer term, it's probably not a great idea to sit granny down on the sofa, shove a Gear VR on her head and say, you know, get fragging. But I think, you know, to give people the chance to play games that they played in their youth and, you know, might want to experience in a different way, I think, you know, there's no harm in it as long as it's heavily caveated to say that this potentially will make you ill if you're not careful.
So one more question before we end off here. I mean, you both have professional careers. You're professional software engineers. You know, you've got day jobs with families, and I'm sure you have your time. You're volunteering to do this. What excites you more? Is it Vireio perception to get games working in VR, or is it problem solving where you're taking something that doesn't exist for VR and you're going through the process of, you know, how do I make this work? Like, what is it that excites? And those are options. They're not necessarily the right options. You know, what excites you to do this, to spend the time on this?
I think for me, much like probably everyone in the room, like VR has been a dream since I was young. Just the ability to go to a different world and really feel like you're there, have a sense of presence is the Star Trek holodeck. So certainly what brought me into Vireio perception and VR in general was just that passion and love for it, with kind of in my normal life, my day job. I work with a lot of clients and we do basically bespoke solutions for everyone. So it was also a good entry point to learn the technologies underneath. I think the problem solving probably just appeals to Simon and I nature as programmers, you know, and it's good it does, because I think if we didn't have that, you know, nothing would work, because we would give up after 5 minutes.
Did you want to add something?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a C++ developer at heart, and I love to solve a problem that is particularly challenging. We've had a number of them over the duration that we've been working on Vireio. You know, if it's like an itch, you've just got to scratch sometimes. And I think I have found that I've probably spent more time working on Vireio without the headset on my head than I have actually probably playing the games I've added support for. You know. But it's about the fun of solving a problem and, you know, just being part of a project. Because, as you say, I have a day job, I have a wife and children, and it's very hard for me to really throw myself fully into VR at this point in my life. It's a good way to get involved however I can.
I know I said it was one more question, but now I got another question. By the way, this is the first time we've met in person. Like, we've known each other for a few years, and we Skyped with each other, and it was like, our relationship was like, bleep, 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 okay, bleep, 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 bleep. This is how we knew each other. And I think you two have actually met in person before. Would you guys have been friends if it wasn't for Vireio? And let me rephrase the question. It's not about, like, would you have connected and built a friendship? Because I think you do have a friendship, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, definitely. Well, definitely not, because I live in Slovakia and Simon's in London, so just the geography alone. But I mean, no, and it's, you know, we've probably got things we share and passions, but VR has been it, and it's been nice to do it. And yeah, we met in London a few months back for a beer, which is another good passion.
Wonderful. Oh, one more thing. Simon, you brought your Samsung Gear VR with Quake, yes?
Yeah.
So tonight, you know, we're going to have hundreds of people here for the public expo, and now he's nervous because he didn't realize how many people are coming. But you know, I understand you're going to have it on display for us, yes?
Yeah, we were thinking Grant and I, because Grant's got his as well.
Okay.
So set up a little multiplayer. People want to give it a try against someone else.
Wonderful. Well, let's give them a round of applause, yeah? Thank you. That's great.